Hello and welcome to Murder Analysed. Thank you, everyone, all over the world, because now there's so many of you, it's hard for me to even name the countries, but thank you, and thank you for all your comments. But before I start this video today, I want to talk about Murder Analysed, because Murder Analysed is a channel, really an adult channel. It is about murders. It is about the perpetrators that commit murders. It is about perpetrators that abuse and sexually abuse children. It is about paedophiles, if that's what you want to call them. It's about serial killers. So there is content within all our videos that some people may find upsetting. Now, what I love about YouTube is that you get the choice to watch this or not. But I'd like to give now a warning out before each video, and also there'll be a slide put up as well, just to make sure that you're aware of what's in our videos. But you know, we don't talk about anything nice. These crimes are not nice, but they are reality. So again, today's case is the case of Vanessa George. Now, I spoke about Vanessa George in the last case I did, which was Helen McCall, Helen's Law. And Vanessa George is a female paedophile. She was a member of a paedophile gang, and the paedophile gang that she was a member of was made up mainly of women. Also, these women who are in this gang were not in any way pushed into it, and it makes it quite clear in this case. Women are as much offenders as men when it comes to sexual abuse and paedophiles. There is no one, you know, they had free will here. They knew what they was doing. And what makes this more shocking is they were doing it for sexual gratification. Now, Vanessa George, she used to work in a nursery, but before she worked in the nursery, she was working as a teaching assistant in a school for many years. Now, you may know this case either as Vanessa George case, or you may know this case as the 2009, I think, Plymouth child abuse case. But this case involves multiple people, mainly George and some others, and I'll name them as we come along in this case. But all of these, 4 women and 1 man, are all paedophiles in their own right, and no one made them do anything. There was no influence here of anything. So this case, with the details I've already told you, if this case is not for you, then turn off now. So let's start with Vanessa George herself, shall we? There's nothing in Vanessa's background from childhood that would have made her do anything like this, not that we could have found. She was, I think her father was a worker. He was a good man. It sounds he was a shipbuilder. She come from not poverty or anything else like that. She had a good upbringing, a normal upbringing. She then sort of got married. She had been married about 20 years at the time of her arrest. She had 2 teenage children at the time of her arrest. She worked, as I said, in this nursery, and she had worked there for 3 years. And this nursery was attached to a school, and it was a private nursery attached to a primary school. So she had access to the majority of children, but the children that she looked after and abused were of the ages between 2 and 5. She was overweight, and I think this, and she says this herself, it's not me saying this, she's weighed about 19 stone. But this girl was known as a bubbly, happy, outgoing girl. Actually, a lot of people have said life and soul of the party this girl was. Lots of friends, lots and lots of work colleagues that loved her. You had children that thought she was this cuddly, lovely teacher, you know, in this kindergarten, in this nursery environment. You had parents that called her the angel. She was such an angel because she was so good to these children. She used to babysit for extra money for local people and friends with their children, because everyone liked her. She had no criminal record at all. And so she was allowed to work with children because there was nothing there to stop her. And she had built up a reputation, first of working in another school as this teaching assistant, and then moved to early childhood. And you have to wonder why. So we have this married woman now, maybe a bit frustrated with being married 20 years. You know, if you've been married 20 years, I can understand that you may want to go online and chat and have a, get away from everything. You've got teenage kids and stuff. I do these videos. So, we do something, don't we, that takes our mind off everyday life. But you see, Vanessa George didn't do that. She went on Facebook to find people. First of all, I think it was innocent, to tell you the truth. I think she's always been a paedophile. But a lot of people, as I've said before about this mask of sanity, what you see from the outside and what you get inside, totally different things. And a lot of people can hold that back. Even serial killers can hold that back before, in the end, the mask starts to crack and out comes this monster. Now, this girl is pure evil. I think it started when she must have been frustrated or something. I'm only surmising. This is just theory, because her life, unless she was doing this and we didn't know, there's probably that, and that's probably as big as percentage as her not doing it before. I don't think there's much difference between whether she may have been abusing the children that she was looking after. I don't know. Before that, she's never admitted it, but then she wouldn't. So she's gone online. She started up then talking to people she knew, and then new people she knew. She'd become infatuated with this life, this online life. Finding it really difficult even then to go to work because she just loved this online life. She was infatuated with Facebook. Couldn't come off it. So her family life, I suppose, started to they started to feel alienated from her because she was spending so much time online and not working, just doing chatting and stuff like that, or so they thought. Plus she had 2 phones. One was called her fun phone, and the other one was her business phone, her work phone, her normal phone where she talked to her husband or friends, or the normal phone. The fun phone, as she calls it, was where she would then chat to people like-minded, like herself. And I think this is where now the issues really started to come out, and her true personality now starts to come through. She first met on there Colin Blanchford. Now, Colin was also married, another part of the UK, because we've got 5 different parts of the UK going on here, different counties. Colin Blanchford, he was married, 2 children, married for 16 years. He had a very good lifestyle, actually. Not as good as he liked people to think it was, and we'll go into that in a little while. But he had this lifestyle, big semi-detached house, and he would go abroad and have to do some work abroad and come back and stuff. And he's, when you look at him from the outside, it's another one that you think, oh, they're doing well, they're doing okay. But when you speak to the neighbours, and when the neighbours spoke about this man, they called him everything. They said he was a fantasist. He would tell them, now this is when you know there's something psychologically wrong with this man, is when I tell you this. He was such a fantasist that he told them he had his own jet, and that he would fly the Liverpool football team to Dubai and all around the world in his jet. He would then brag about his 50-inch TVs he's got, put it all over Facebook. Look what I've got, look what I've got. He even had palm trees craned in to his garden. Then he said he was a filmmaker. Well, aren't we all filmmakers? But he earned millions and millions, even though he lived in this detached house, what wasn't worth millions. But a few years prior to this case coming out, So now we know sort of his personality, you know, and I think actually, I'm going to say it, the neighbours actually called him Billy Bullshitter, or Del Boy, a lot of them called him. Now, Del Boy comes from Only Fools and Horses. It's a character, isn't it? And it's a fantastic show, Only Fools and Horses. I love it. But I don't even think Del Boy was that bad at his fantasist lifestyle. He was someone that actually the neighbours didn't like and always found quite strange because of these stories he would tell. Plus he worked and he would go abroad a lot. And several years prior to this arrest in 2009 of these paedophile gang, he had been abroad, and as he was coming through, Customs and Excise seized his computer, as they do. You know, you could hide drugs or anything in him. They seized his computer and checked his computer, and they found on them indecent images of children. So this was several years prior to him meeting Vanessa George online. As usual in this country, he was given like a slap on the wrist. Don't do that, because he only downloaded them, you see. He only downloaded images, indecent images of children being abused. He didn't then go off and distribute them out. But let's make it quite clear about indecent images of children. These are not cartoons. These are not drawings. These are taken of real children being abused. So how this man just got a slap on the wrist for this, I don't know. They put him on the child sex register. And after a few years, it's forgotten about really. 5 years later, 2007, really, that was it. He was done, cautioned, put on the register and forgotten about. But in the meantime, you see, this man continued on now, not only then to download, but to abuse. So this Colin Blanchard, he, I think, lived in Rochdale at the time of his arrest. And he started then to have this conversation online with Vanessa George. And as I say, at first it started off, I suppose, normally. And then they started to get into their fantasies. Because he's a fantasist and a paedophile. So they start talking about their fantasies, and then all of a sudden, of course, she's in the perfect position, in her job with this access to these children. So then they start talking about indecent images, how they're going to get them, what they're going to do, in graphic terms, really. Now, there was never anything put directly on Facebook itself, or else they would have been caught a lot earlier. Facebook would not allow this sort of content to go on their open site. But I think it started on there, or we know it started on there, this conversation. But then they start moving to the dark web, to other places where they can then talk and share this information out. And there is no way that you can put up indecent images of children on Facebook and get away with it. So we know that didn't happen. But it was the content they started to talk about. So as things got worse, as things then become, they escalated, these people then wanted more and more. And of course, Vanessa George was such a willing participant, because she actually loved it, that not only did she take 64 photos, or actually not 64 photos, about 300 photos, what they know of children within this nursery, very young children. And then he took photos as well of him abusing. So he went from someone that was just downloading to now being the abuser as well. And it looked like they was in competition with each other. Who could create the most graphic, horrific photos? Now, I said before that Vanessa George had 2 teenage children. They were both girls. Now, she did produce, and entice and do things with this child. I think she was 14 at the age, sexually, to her own child, We know that. She then done things to these children in this nursery where she was at that stage, and this is 2008 or 7 to 8, leading up to her arrest, where she worked in this private nursery attached to this school with colleagues that loved her. She'd worked there 3 years, life and soul, everyone trusted her. She then began to take the children in and change their nappies on her own. You can't do that anymore, so let's make that quite clear. She would then abuse them with stuff that she found around in the nursery, items that she found in the nursery. She would also bring in sex toys with her to this nursery and abuse these children with that. She also was allowed to have a phone, and I think in them days she was, but she definitely had her phone, where she would record her abuse on these children, extreme abuse on very young children. She'd never show their faces ever in any of the photographs. There was no faces, because it was then much more difficult to find out who these children were and whether it was a lot of the same children she was abusing or many different children, and that's made this very difficult. So in the end she was charged with 64 different charges to do with sexual indecent images of children and sexual abuse of children within this nursery. And where they were swapping these photos around, other people then started to come in to this group. I think first we'll go back now to how these were caught and how then we can describe about the others. So Colin Blanchard, as I said, he worked and he used to go abroad a lot for his work. But this man was so confident in himself, you know, not to get caught, even though he's been caught once before with indecent images of children. He used his work computer, and they thought, because of his flamboyant lifestyle that he was saying, you know, this fantasist, they actually thought that he was stealing from the company, actually. So when he went off on one of his business trips, the computer was there. So they searched the computer, which they're allowed to do because it was a work computer, for evidence of him stealing money from the company. And what they found was extreme child pornography at the highest category. They couldn't believe it. They with one thing they've said, they didn't believe that that was him. They really did feel that he was just stealing from this company. They immediately called the police, and the police were brought in. They analysed his computer, and when he stepped back off the plane from Dubai, he was arrested immediately, and straight away he gave up Vanessa George. Don't forget, they've only ever met online. So now they've got all these photos of these children with no faces on them to find these children. All they had, though, was a photo that Vanessa George had sent Colin with the nursery badge on it, saying what the nursery was. And that's how they found her. So again, she had no criminal record. He did. And it was only by accident that, because of his way he was, that his company thought it was stealing, but they never thought, they wasn't looking for that. So she would never have been caught unless he had been caught. So it took them about a week, I think, to track her down. The nursery was immediately closed for investigation. She was then charged, I think, with 64 counts of child abuse and stuff for these children in there. But as I said, there's probably more. They know there's more. They can't identify these children. It made it very, very difficult, and it still has. And this has left the parents of this nursery and the parents of the people that allowed her to babysit issues now, because they wouldn't know. She always went for children that couldn't tell. Very, very young children. The police state in their investigations of how disturbing these images was. You see, not only was they distributing these images of children, they were also graphic images of what they would do with animals sexually, so bestiality. And it seemed to be the more extreme the better, as if they were in some competition of who can do the worst extreme acts, either on a child or on an animal. It was terrible, and this included Vanessa George's own children. So as now police are starting to search this case, really investigating this case, because usually when you find one paedophile, you'll find many, because you can track them back. But these people didn't even try and hide anything. Now, at the same time, when they were all talking, there was another woman they were talking to, and her name was Angela Allen. And I think she was from Nottingham, or near Nottingham. And she was a mother in her late 30s, the same as all of them were actually, in their late 30s. And she had 2 children. Now, she was an ex-prostitute many years ago, and she was also had charges of dishonesty against her, so it could have been fraud related, but it's just dishonesty. That's all I could really find about her. So even though when George and both of them was caught, Vanessa and Colin were caught, this woman knew they was caught, but she didn't hide any evidence. When they went in her property to search her property, it was all there. It was all there. Plus the house was terrible, filthy, terrible. These poor children. And, you know, the police have stated it was terrible, terrible, terrible. But she had made no attempt at all to hide anything. And actually, she didn't abuse as many. But hers were babies. So she was, you know, adding her bit in. And as I said, it was like a competition with these 3 especially. They really started then to try and outdo each other when it come to who can do the grossest deeds to a child. What photographs can I outdo you because I've done this? That's what it really looks like. And I think how they sort of describe it, it was this competition, and it was all done for sexual gratification. I think the police in this investigation, when they talk about Angela Allen, talk about her as the most sinister and evil of them all. Really. She talks about rape and raping animals, and she films herself raping animals, and as I said, babies. I don't, and this is what I think this really affected, I think, these police officers within this investigation, because I don't think they'd ever seen anything as graphic. I mean, they've seen a lot, believe it. You know, these police officers investigate, you know, sexual abuse like this, have seen a lot. And so for them to say these were graphic, this was probably one of the most graphic they've ever seen, you can really imagine what this woman was like. So now we have Colin, we have Vanessa, we have Angela, and now we have Tracy Lyons. Now, Tracy Lyons was a mother of 9 from Portsmouth. Yes, a mother of 9. Now, she was charged and she was part of this group, and she was distributing, you know, I think sending photos and getting photos, whatever, you know, the same as the rest of them, really. I think she was pled guilty in March 2010 to assaulting a child by penetration, sexual assault of a child under the age of 13, causing a child under the age of 13 to engage in sexual activity, and 3 offences of distributing indecent images, indecent photographs of children. So that's Tracy Lyons. And then the 5th member of this paedophile ring, which we know of, which they've said is a lady called Tracy Druber. Now, she's a care worker. Now, there's not a lot of difference from a child to an elderly person when it comes to vulnerability. And this is why, when you're on the sex offenders register, you cannot work with either of them groups, because the danger to them from a perpetrator like this, from either one of these groups, is high. So she worked as a care support worker, and she came from, I think, Merseyside. She was found guilty of one count of sexually abusing a baby, another one that liked the babies. So I think Vanessa George, she was charged with, I think really, it was indecent images of children between the ages of 2 and 5 from this children at this nursery. As I said, there was other images, but they couldn't see who they were, and so it's not very good. And she worked, and also she, I think, also took pictures, sexual pictures and indecent images of her own child, or 14-year-old daughter. The police don't believe that any of these images were then sent out to more than that, but they can't be sure, and you wouldn't really know, really. I think they've gone through all their computers and phones and stuff, but they could have done it from someone else. You don't know. But for now, I think the police thought that was it. But they do know there was more sort of victims, but they just couldn't. It was really hard to identify these victims because they was all very careful not to show faces. And actually, Vanessa George was arrested at that nursery. They walked straight in there and got her out there and then, and that nursery was closed. And now that nursery is no longer there. It's now run by the school. I think it's another organisation that run it, but the school now that it's attached to actually has a lot to do with that nursery and the management of child protection. But as I say, child protection, when it comes to nurseries and stuff like that, since 2009, of course, and since this case, has changed a lot. There's now lots of things you can't do. This would or should never happen again, because really the safeguards are in place is that this can't really happen again. You should not be able to be on your own with a child, even in a daycare centre. You should not be able to change a child's underwear or go and change a child's nappy on your own. So there's safeguards in place now, so please don't be too put off about putting your kids into nursery now. It's not the same as it was then. There's lots and lots of safeguards, and now actually probably so many safeguards that you can't even touch these children, really. I think on the 15th of December 2009, Vanessa George was given an indeterminate sentence, really, and was told that she would have to serve at least 7 years. 7 years. With the provision that she must prove that she is safe and safe to go out into the public before she would get parole. That was 2009 when she was sentenced. She was also, as I said in the last video that we done about Helen's Law, this girl was released in 2019. The parole considered her application, and so she was freed after 10 years. So she was really the instigator, and really one of the most seriously charged within this case, I think, apart from Colin Blanchford. He got a little bit longer, but this is a paedophile. This is a sexual offender of children, of very young children, and her own children. And she got 7 years. Extended, I think, up, so I think she was released after 10, because she told the parole board that she had had all this counselling to give her back her self-confidence, and she had lost 3 stone, and now she thought she was capable of going out into the public. Again, never being allowed to work with children again. Actually, she's never allowed access to online access of any kind, or if she breaches that, she will be put back into prison because she would have breached her parole rules. Now, let's talk about now Angela Allen, who pleaded guilty to distributing indecent images of children, and she had 4 counts of sexual assault against her, and these all involved children. So Angela Allen was given, I think on the 15th of December, she was also given an indeterminate sentence of 5 years, but she was released after 4. Back out into the community, this mother of 2. And on the 10th of January 2011, Colin Blanchard was given an indeterminate sentence again of at least 9 years, and then 2 other members of the paedophile ring, Tracy Dubra and Tracy Lyons, were sentenced to 4 years and 7 years respectively. Tracy Lyons was released from prison in October 2011, 9 months after her conviction, having spent 2 years in prison. Her release was condemned by Child Protection charity Kidscape, and their spokesman Claudia stating that this early release was a betrayal, really, of the victims and their families, who are still suffering till this day, because they know what happened to some of their children. Because there's no faces, you had a lot of people who had their children in this nursery that don't know whether their child was abused or not. And I think this is where Helen's Law really comes into this. And Helen's Law is about no body, no parole when it comes to murder and where the victim has not been found. But it also comes in to where people like Vanessa George, Colin, Tracy, Angela, all these, where they took photos, and especially Vanessa George, of children, hid their faces so you couldn't identify them. Also not saying if there's other perpetrators out there, only really admitting to any evidence that they could actually prove, that the investigation could prove. So Helen's Law, what it says in Helen's Law is that perpetrators like this should not be released out of prison until they tell the whole truth about their crimes and their victims. That's what Helen's Law was about. And this case, really, all of these people now are out. All of them. They're out on the streets. So when we talk about, crime and punishment, you want to say, I have to agree with some of these charities like Kidscape and all this, but saying it's, what message are you sending out there? What are you saying about the victims? Because really, in any case, the victim is the most important person that we should consider, but we don't. And it's really a terrible state, really, when you think about what we're in, because we have so many of these crimes now. And this case highlights that these crimes and these perpetrators are not just men. They are women. And they look like me and you. Remember, Vanessa George, she's an angel. That's how she was described by the parents of the children that she was abusing. Life and soul of the party, great friend, great neighbour, by the people that knew her and her work colleagues. You'll never know, we'll never know the extent of all of their crimes, really. And they made sure of that by hiding them children's faces. So Vanessa George now goes by the name, I think, of Hazel when she's out there somewhere. She dyes her hair from blonde to brown. But you can change anything here, can't you? We can all dye our hair and everything. But what that girl can't change is what's inside her. And that's the part that we've got to worry about. So I hope you found this case interesting. You know what to do. Thumbs up if you've liked it. You can subscribe to where Lacey puts up the logo. Actually, as I always say, subscribe anytime you'd like, that's fine. Keep your comments coming. I do have other jobs, so this, it takes me a bit of a while. I'm sorry to get back to you on some of the comments, but I do try. You can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook. So, until the next time, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.